What if the thing standing between a man and certain death was a dog? Not a rifle, not a wall, not a treaty signed by men in suits who never once set foot in the desert. A dog. And not just any dog. A half-starved, trail-worn, mud-colored mutt that nobody would have looked at twice in any town west of the Mississippi. But she sat down, right between them, and nobody moved. By the end of this story, you're going to understand something that most history books skip right over. That out on the frontier, in the years when the land was still raw and the rules hadn't caught up with the territory yet, the most powerful force alive wasn't always the one holding the gun. Sometimes it was something older than guns, older than borders, older than the whole idea of the West. Stay with me, because this story only gets stranger. The year was 1873. The Arizona Territory was, by most accounts, a place where the land itself seemed to be in a bad mood. The sun beat down on red rock like a grudge that never cooled. Water was a rumor. Shade was a luxury, and the distance between one human being and another could be measured not just in miles, but in the particular kind of silence that makes a man feel like the last person left alive on Earth. Into this landscape, in the spring of that year, rode a man named Caleb Horne. Caleb was 34 years old, though he looked closer to 45. That was what the territory did. It aged you fast, dried you out, stripped the softness off your face, and left behind something harder and quieter. He had come west from Tennessee after the war, like so many others. Men who needed to put distance between themselves and whatever they'd seen in those years. Men who found that sleep didn't come easy, in places where people remembered your face. Caleb didn't talk much about the war. He didn't talk much about anything. What he did, what he was known for, in the loose and informal way that reputations travel along dusty frontier roads, was horses. He had a way with them that other men noticed and couldn't quite explain. It wasn't training, exactly. It wasn't tricks. It was something closer to patience. An absolute, almost unnatural willingness to wait. To sit in the dirt beside a frightened animal for hours without making a sound, until the animal decided, on its own terms, that the man wasn't a threat. That same quality, the patience, the silence, the willingness to be still, was about to be tested in a way that had nothing to do with horses. He had set up a modest operation about 40 miles south of Tucson, near a stretch of land that sat uncomfortably close to territory that the U.S. Army and various Apache bands were actively, bitterly, and violently contesting. His nearest neighbor was 8 miles away. His nearest town was 23. He had, by the time our story begins, 1 employee, a young Tohono O'odham man named Sito, who helped with the horses and occasionally translated when necessary, and 1 dog. The dog had no proper name. Caleb called her Dog, which tells you something about the man's relationship with sentiment. She had shown up at his camp one February morning, 3 years earlier, thin enough that you could count her ribs from 10 paces. He had put a tin plate of scraps outside the door. She had eaten. She had stayed. She was, by any objective measurement, an unremarkable animal. Medium-sized, short brown coat, ears that could never quite decide whether they wanted to stand up or fold down. She had the particular kind of face that conveyed, at all times, a profound and slightly judgmental awareness of everything happening within a radius of about 100 yards. That awareness is going to matter. Now, before we go any further, I need you to drop something in the comments right now. Have you ever heard a story about an animal doing something that genuinely changed the outcome for a human being? Because I've been collecting these, and what Caleb's dog did that afternoon in April is one of the most remarkable things I've ever come across. Tell me yours while we keep going. The trouble started, as trouble in the territory often did, over something that seemed small and became enormous very quickly. A group of Apache men, 3 of them, from a band that had been pushed repeatedly off their traditional land over the preceding decade, had been tracking a stolen horse. Their horse, one of 2 that had been taken from their camp during a raid by a separate group of settlers 8 days earlier. They had followed the trail south and west, across 40 miles of hard country, and they had found it. The horse, a compact, dark bay mare with a distinctive white marking on her left rear ankle, was standing in Caleb Horne's corral. Now, here is where you have to understand something about the shape of this situation. Caleb had bought that horse from a man passing through 3 weeks prior. He had paid $14 for her, which was a fair price. He had no way of knowing she had been stolen. The man who sold her to him was long gone. But the 3 Apache men standing outside his fence didn't know that. What they saw was their horse. In this man's corral, behind this man's fence, and they had come a long way. And they had been wronged repeatedly. And the accumulation of those wrongs had a weight to it that $14 and a stranger's honest face were not going to easily offset. The most direct of the 3, the one who rode slightly ahead of the others, which in Apache social dynamics said something significant about his standing, was a man whose name, as best we can reconstruct from the account Caleb later gave to a territorial magistrate, translated roughly as Red Sky at Evening. He was, Caleb guessed, somewhere between 25 and 30 years old. He carried a rifle across his saddle. He did not appear to be in the mood for extended conversation. Caleb was alone. Cito had ridden out that morning to trade at a settlement to the east and wasn't expected back until the following day. Caleb walked out of his house to meet them. He didn't reach for anything. He stood about 15 feet from his door, arms loose at his sides, and he waited. The 3 men stopped at the fence. Red Sky at Evening looked at the horse. He looked at Caleb. He said something in Apache that Caleb didn't understand. Caleb said, "I don't speak Apache." He kept his voice level, "But I can see what you're looking at." There was a moment, one of those moments that stretches, where no one did anything. And then Dog walked out. She came from behind the house, moving at her usual unhurried pace, tail neither raised nor tucked, ears in that characteristic half-mast position. She crossed the open ground between the house and the fence without hesitation or aggression, and she sat down, directly between Caleb and the 3 men. She didn't bark, she didn't growl, she simply sat there and looked at Red Sky at Evening with that particular expression she had, the one that conveyed total, measured awareness. And here is the thing that nobody fully understands, even now. Red Sky at Evening stopped. He had been leaning forward, his hand had been moving, and he stopped. He looked at the dog, and something shifted in his face. What happened in the next 2 hours, the slow, painstaking, gesture-based negotiation that followed, the return of the horse, the exchange of goods, the eventual handshake, all of that followed from that moment. That pause, that dog. But why? Why does a dog sitting down change anything? To answer that, we have to go somewhere most Wild West stories never bother to go, into the actual, documented cultural relationship between Apache people and dogs. And this is where the story stops being just a story and starts being something that makes you rethink everything you thought you understood about that era. The Apache, and here I'm speaking broadly across several distinct bands, each with their own specific traditions, did not have the same cultural relationship with dogs that European-descended settlers did. For most settlers, a dog was property, a tool, guard duty and company, but fundamentally subordinate, owned. For many Apache groups, dogs occupied a more complex position. They were understood as beings with their own spiritual status, In certain Apache traditions, dogs were seen as boundary keepers, animals that existed at the threshold between human settlement and the wild, between the known and the unknown. They were considered capable of perceiving things that human beings could not, including intent. That last part matters enormously. There was a belief, held in various forms across multiple native cultures of the Southwest, that a dog's behavior in the presence of a stranger revealed something true about that stranger's spirit. A dog that growled or fled was reading something real. A dog that was calm, that sat willingly in the space between, was communicating something just as real. What dog did, by sitting down between Caleb and Red Sky at evening without fear, without aggression, without retreat, was, in a framework that Red Sky at evening understood and believed, deliver a verdict. This man is not your enemy. Now, I want to be careful here. I am not saying that a dog's behavior is an infallible moral measurement. I'm not saying Red Sky at evening would have described it in those exact terms. What I'm saying is that in that moment, in that cultural context, the dog's action carried a meaning that cut through every other barrier. Language barrier, history barrier, the thick accumulated weight of years of broken agreements and stolen land, and men who smiled while they lied. The dog sat down, and something was heard. And I have to ask you, because I genuinely want to know what you think. Does that change anything for you? About how we understand communication? About what we've lost when we decided that the only things worth paying attention to are the things that can be written down or legally enforced? Leave me something in the comments. I'll read them. The negotiation, such as it was, lasted the better part of the afternoon. Neither man spoke the other's language. What they had was gesture, object, and the increasingly active involvement of Dog, who, once she had delivered her initial verdict, proceeded to divide her attention among all four of the humans, present with the focused diplomacy of someone who understood that the meeting was ongoing and her presence was still required. She accepted water from Red Sky at evening's cupped hand at one point. He let her smell his wrist for a long moment before she drank. Caleb watched this and said nothing. What emerged, slowly, from the gestures and the objects placed on the ground between them, Caleb's documentation of his purchase, indicated by pointing at dates and marks on the paper. Red Sky at evening's indication of the horse, confirmed by her recognition of him when he whistled a particular pattern, was a picture that both men could see clearly enough. The horse had been stolen. Caleb hadn't stolen her. The man who had was gone. The question was what happened next. Caleb made a decision. He walked to the corral, opened the gate, and led the mare out. He handed the lead rope to Red Sky at evening. Then he went back inside his house and came out with a folded piece of cloth, a blanket, good quality, traded from a Navajo merchant the previous autumn, and a tin of coffee. He placed them on the ground near the fence, not as payment, not as an apology exactly, more like an acknowledgement that something had gone wrong between people, not because of these people specifically, but between people, and that the acknowledgement itself had a value. Red Sky at evening looked at the blanket and the coffee for a long moment. He looked at Caleb. He looked at Dog. Dog wagged her tail. Twice. That was approximately the most enthusiasm she ever displayed about anything. Red Sky at evening picked up the blanket and the coffee. He said something to the two men behind him. He looked back at Caleb one more time, and then they rode north. Caleb stood in his yard until they were out of sight. Then he sat down in the dirt, next to Dog, who was already sitting, and didn't move for a while. Now, here's what I need you to understand about what came next, because this is where the story stops being just remarkable and starts being genuinely rare. Over the following 3 years, Caleb Horne and the man he would always refer to in his accounts simply as the Apache horsemen, crossed paths 4 more times. Each time was brief. Each time was wordless, or nearly so. The first time, Caleb was riding a canyon route he used regularly. He came around a bend, and there was red sky at evening. Alone, watering a horse at a shallow stream, both men stopped. Neither reached for anything. After a moment, red sky at evening raised one hand. Not a wave, exactly, more of an acknowledgement. And Caleb raised his in return. That was it. They rode in opposite directions. The second time, Caleb found a piece of worked leather hanging from the fence post nearest his house. Intricate pattern. Good craftwork. No note, obviously. No indication of who had left it, but Caleb had a fairly clear sense. The third time, Caleb was on foot, his horse having thrown a shoe in inconvenient terrain about 6 miles from home, and he was walking back in the kind of heat that makes a man recalculate his life choices. He crested a rise and came face to face with a small group of Apache riders, 5 of them, and red sky at evening among them. There was a pause, a longer one than usual, and then one of the men rode forward and indicated, with clear and unambiguous gesture, that Caleb should get on behind him. They rode him to within a mile of his home, left him there without ceremony, rode away. Caleb wrote about this in a letter to his sister in Tennessee, the only personal correspondence that survives from this period. He wrote, "I don't have a word for what we are to each other. Friend doesn't fit, and enemy never did, but there is something there that I would not trade." The fourth and final encounter happened in the winter of 1876. Caleb found red sky at evening at his door, alone, visibly unwell, a wound on his left side that had gone bad in the cold. What happened next, Caleb described only briefly. He treated the wound as best he could, which was not well, but was something. He gave the man shelter for 2 nights. On the morning of the 3rd day, red sky at evening was gone. He had left, on Caleb's table, the rifle he had carried across his saddle on the day they first met. Caleb kept it for the rest of his life. Let me tell you something about the frontier that the dime novels and the motion pictures have spent 150 years burying under melodrama and gunfighter mythology. Most of the encounters between white settlers and native people in the American West were not dramatic. They were not cinematic. They were not clean. They were awkward, ambiguous, often terrifying, sometimes kind, almost always built on a foundation of miscommunication and mistrust that was the entirely predictable result of a policy of conquest that neither the settlers nor the native people on the ground had personally designed or chosen. The men and women who lived it, on both sides, were navigating something that their history hadn't prepared them for, and their governments were actively making worse. And into that mess, occasionally, something genuinely human broke through. Not because someone said the right thing, not because a treaty was honored, not because the powerful did the right thing, which they demonstrably and repeatedly did not, but because a dog sat down, and both men, for different reasons and from different traditions, understood what it meant to pay attention to that. If you're still here, and I hope you are, because we're getting to the part where this story connects to something that goes well beyond 1873 Arizona, I want to ask you to hit that subscribe button right now. Not because the algorithm demands it, though sure, the algorithm demands it, but because if you're the kind of person who finds this story worth 15 minutes of your day, there are dozens more stories exactly like this one waiting for you. Stories that history filed in the wrong drawer. Stories about the moments when everything could have gone differently, and occasionally, against all odds, did. Subscribe, and you won't miss a single one. Caleb Horne lived until 1909. He died in Tucson at the age of 70, having never returned to Tennessee. He never married. He raised horses until he was too old to work the corral himself, And then he found younger people to work it, while he supervised from a chair near the fence. Dog died in the winter of 1878, which puts her at somewhere around 8 or 9 years old, a respectable age for an animal living that life in that country. Caleb mentioned her death in one of his infrequent letters to his sister. He wrote only, "Lost my dog Tuesday. She was a good one." He didn't write more than that. He was not, as we have established, a man who said more than he needed to. He's buried in a small cemetery on the eastern edge of Tucson. The grave marker, which still exists, though it requires some effort to find, reads, Caleb J. Horne, 1839–1909. He understood the value of keeping still. Nobody knows who wrote that. His sister had been dead for years by the time he passed. He had no children. The few people who knew him well enough to arrange the burial were not inclined to elaborate. But whoever chose those words understood something true: the value of keeping still. In a territory that rewarded speed and noise and the willingness to act before you thought, in an era that enshrined the fast draw and the quick decision as the highest possible masculine virtues. This man's epitaph was about stillness, about the things you can perceive when you stop moving long enough to perceive them, about what becomes possible when you let something else, something older than your agenda, older than your fear, sit down in the space between you and the thing you don't understand. Now I want to zoom out, because this story isn't just about one man and one dog and one extraordinary afternoon in 1873. It's about a quality that the frontier, for all its violence and chaos, occasionally forced on people who had no other options. Historians who specialize in cross-cultural encounters in the American West have documented, in the margins of the larger story of conquest and displacement, a surprising number of relationships that defied the simple categories: enemy, ally, threat, property, savage, civilized, that the official narrative was built around. These weren't the majority. Let's be absolutely clear about that. The majority of the story of the American West is a story of dispossession, broken agreements, and violence carried out by the powerful against people who were in the way of something the powerful wanted. But in the margins, in the individual, unwitnessed, unrecorded moments, something else was also happening. People were paying attention to each other, reading each other, finding across every barrier that had been deliberately constructed to prevent exactly this kind of recognition, something that felt uncomfortably like common ground. And often, not always, but often, those moments of recognition involved animals, horses most frequently. The shared language of horsemanship crossed more cultural barriers in the American West than almost any other single point of contact. But also dogs, and the particular, specific, almost liturgical significance that dogs held in many Native American traditions as boundary keepers and truth-tellers. What Red Sky at evening saw when Dog sat down was not what Caleb saw, but both things were real, and both things pointed in the same direction. And out of that coincidence, if coincidence is even the right word, something survived that should not have. I want to leave you with one last thought before we close. We talk a lot in the modern world about communication, about breaking down barriers, about cross-cultural understanding. We have conferences about it. We write books about it. We build entire academic disciplines around the question of how human beings from different traditions manage or fail to hear each other. And yet, there is a 34-year-old horse trainer in 1873 Arizona who achieved in 2 hours, in silence, without a shared language, without a treaty, without a mediator, without any of the tools we have decided are necessary for understanding, something that most of our conferences and books and academic disciplines are still straining toward. He did it because he stood still, because he didn't reach for anything, because he had, through years of working with frightened horses, developed the specific skill of making himself non-threatening in a situation where every instinct said to arm himself, and every piece of received wisdom said the other man was the enemy. And because a mud-colored, unremarkable dog sat down at the right moment and delivered a verdict that crossed every barrier. Tell me, and I mean this sincerely, not as a content prompt, but as a genuine question, what do you think that moment felt like? For Caleb? For red sky at evening? What is it like to be seen accurately, across a gulf that wide, by a creature that has no stake in the outcome, except that it lives where you live and it knows you? Leave it in the comments. I'll be there. This video was produced using artificial intelligence tools, developed independently and exclusively for the purpose of entertainment and the exploration of historical themes. The characters, events, dialogues, and specific scenarios depicted, including Caleb Horne, red sky at evening, and the encounters described, are fictional reconstructions and creative interpretations. They are the product of the author's imagination, informed by documented historical context, but not drawn from any single verified historical record. For accurate historical information about the Apache people, the Arizona Territory, and cross-cultural encounters in the American West, we encourage you to consult academic sources, tribal historical records, and institutions dedicated to the preservation of Native American history. This story was built to make you feel something. The history behind it is real and deserves more than a feeling. It deserves your curiosity.